November 11th, 1918. The guns fell silent. Church bells rang, flags waved, and exhausted crowds filled the streets of Paris and London. Europe celebrated as if peace had returned forever. But while champagne flowed in public squares, panic ruled in private offices. Behind closed doors, finance ministers and central bankers were staring at ledgers that told a far darker story. The victors had won the war, but they had lost their money. Britain, once the unquestioned banker of the world, was no longer lending. It was borrowing. France, triumphant yet devastated, faced mountains of debt and fields of ruin. The empires that had ruled the global economy for a century were suddenly dependent on someone else. Across the Atlantic, the United States had not only supplied the war, it had financed it, and now it expected to be repaid. Most history books end the story in 1918, with parades and treaties. But that is where the real drama begins. Britain and France owed the United States billions of dollars. These were not abstract numbers. They were obligations written in contracts, accruing interest every single day. To survive politically and financially, the Allies turned to the defeated nation at their feet. Germany would pay. There was only one problem. Germany had no gold, no colonies, and no functioning economy capable of producing such wealth. So how do you extract money from a nation that has none? This question gave birth to what would become the most dangerous financial experiment of the 20th century. Germany would borrow money from American banks. It would use those loans to pay reparations to Britain and France, and Britain and France would use those payments to repay their war debts to the United States. Dollar by dollar, the money would circle the Atlantic in an endless loop. On paper, everyone was solvent. In reality, the entire system rested on fragile credit. This is the story of that loop: how it worked, why it collapsed, and how its consequences echoed far beyond the 1920s. From the Dawes Plan to the Great Depression, from hyperinflation to political extremism, we will trace how a financial arrangement reshaped the modern world. Europe may have won the war on the battlefield, but in the quiet arithmetic of debt, the balance of power had shifted. Before the first shot was fired in 1914, the world economy revolved around a single city: London. The city was not merely a financial center, it was the engine of global trade. The British pound sterling served as the backbone of international commerce, anchored to gold and trusted from Buenos Aires to Bombay. In the vaults of the Bank of England lay the metal that guaranteed stability. Merchants in Hong Kong and bankers in New York accepted the same currency because they trusted the same standard. This was the age of the gold standard, an era of predictability and confidence. But war does not respect stability. By the winter of 1915, illusions of a short and glorious conflict had dissolved in the mud of the trenches. The war was devouring men, machinery, and money at a speed no empire had ever experienced. Britain was spending roughly £5 million a day. For a pre-war economy built on careful balance and credit discipline, this was unsustainable. Gold reserves that had accumulated over generations began to drain away. Shipments crossed the Atlantic to pay for food, munitions, and raw materials. The world's greatest creditor was slowly transforming into the world's largest borrower. To sustain the war effort, Britain did more than tap into savings. It liquidated overseas investments, sold foreign railways, and reduced its financial footprint abroad. Assets built over a century were exchanged for short-term survival. The imperial crown still shone, but the treasury beneath it was hollowing out. At this moment of vulnerability, a new power expanded its influence. The House of Morgan, led by J.P. Morgan, became the official purchasing agent for Britain and France in the United States. What began as a financial arrangement quickly became something far larger. American banks organized loans, coordinated supply contracts, and ensured that factories across the Midwest produced everything from artillery shells to grain shipments. The scale was unprecedented. Billions of dollars in orders flowed through a single private financial network. The war effort of the Entente became inseparable from American credit. If Britain and France were to prevail, American capital had to keep flowing. The battlefield and Wall Street were now connected by contracts rather than cables. Meanwhile, France endured devastation on its own soil. The industrial regions of the north, coal mines, steel mills, rail hubs, were reduced to shattered landscapes. For Paris, the war was not an abstraction measured in balance sheets. It was visible in destroyed towns and displaced families. Yet the financial strain was just as severe. France borrowed heavily, confident that victory would allow reparations to cover the cost. "Germany will pay" became more than a slogan. It became a financial strategy. But this strategy rested on a dangerous assumption: that a defeated economy could somehow generate unprecedented wealth. Between 1914 and 1919, French public debt soared to levels that strained even optimistic projections. The longer the war continued, the deeper the fiscal gap grew. Across the ocean, the United States underwent a transformation of its own. In 1914, it was still perceived as a rising but secondary economic power. By 1918, it had become the arsenal and creditor of the Western world. Industrial output surged. Cities expanded. American banks accumulated claims on European governments worth over $10 billion. When the armistice was signed, the military conflict ended. But financially, a new hierarchy had emerged. The United States stood at the top as the principal creditor. Britain and France, though victorious, were tied to Washington through binding obligations. The war of soldiers had concluded. The war of invoices had just begun. As Europe assessed the cost of victory, American bankers were already calculating repayment schedules. The ledgers were clear, debts must be serviced, yet the continent that owed the money lay exhausted. To meet their commitments, the victors turned toward Germany. The next phase of the debt loop was about to begin.